Good morning. Welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gradick, your host. Delighted to have you with us. And we're acknowledging Stroke Awareness Month. And we're very honored having our Studio One, if not the newest member of the Tanner physician staff, Dr. Michael Wilshire. He's a board certified in neurology, earned his medical degree from Mercer University of Medicine in Macon. After completing a residency in neurology at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, he completed a fellowship in neurology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. And his big claim to fame is not completely original to Noonan, but spent most of his growing up years in Noonan, Georgia, so he's a local boy. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you've just joined the Tanner group.
Yes, sir. So I started working here in about August, beginning of August, and finished all that training that you listed, and came back here to Georgia and started working at Tanner Health as a neurologist. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, welcome to the Carroll County area and the West Shore. Well, you've already been in, from Noonan, so I'm not really welcoming you to anything new.
Well, thank you.
As we talked before the program, to me, one of the worst diseases and one of the worst situations, medically speaking, is when someone has a stroke. Mm-hmm. This being Stroke Awareness Month, let's just kind of jump into it. Give us kind of the 101 medical explanation of a stroke, and so maybe I think we all think we know what a stroke is, but let's be sure.
Sure. So a stroke fundamentally is when the brain tissue is not receiving oxygen, and so there's several reasons that we can talk about maybe later, but fundamentally it's when your brain is not getting oxygen, and then the brain cells will go through a process of dying, and that can cause serious debility if not death.
How long can it go without oxygen?
Around 10-15 minutes before a stroke.
I didn't know it'd be that
occurs.
long.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it varies for everyone. But we're talking minutes, definitely. Not hours, certainly.
So effectively, the brain tissue dies.
Yes, sir. It dies, but it doesn't die immediately. There's reserves, and so if let's say a blood clot were to occlude an artery, you would be having a stroke, and then the brain doesn't get the blood that it needs, and then the cells will begin to die, and that process takes some minutes. And so what we'll talk probably about today is how we can prevent, even if the clot happens, how we can prevent that cell from ultimately dying.
Yeah, we'll speak a lot about that, but now brain cells don't regenerate. I mean,
correct.
You can break an arm or have other physical problems, but when the brain cell dies, it's gone.
Absolutely. And I think that's, we were talking, like you mentioned beforehand, I think that's fundamentally why stroke is such a devastating disease. Once a brain cell is dead, it is truly dead and won't regenerate like other parts of your body.
Before we get into more signs and symptoms and prevention, et cetera, give us... because when somebody has a stroke, it seems like, the effects of it are a little bit different for everybody. Mm-hmm. Where do most strokes occur, and where would you, if you had to have a stroke, where would you want it in the brain?
Yeah, so what I say in clinic when I see patients is that, it's all about real estate in the brain. And so if you have a stroke, you will have dying brain cells. But the way the brain's set up is that these certain circuits in certain parts of the brain do very specific things. And so if you happen to have a stroke in an area that's not doing much, then, you may be in a lucky situation. Most strokes occur in what we call the middle cerebral artery distribution. That's where your carotid artery comes up. And we have an acronym for common symptoms, or the most common type of strokes, and that's called FAST. Face is the F. So if you had drooping of your face, numbness of your face abruptly, the A stands for arms, and so if you have weakness of your arms, The S is speech. So if you have, slurred or different speech, and the T stands for time, which really is highlighting the importance of time in recognizing stroke. And so that acronym kind of highlights where stroke, what kind of symptoms you would have if you had a stroke in the most common part, which is the middle cerebral artery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the brain, though, is made up in large part by electrical pulses and electrical communication, right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
So how does that impact the stroke, or does it?
It doesn't. So the stroke or strokes are blood flow.
Or it's just simply blood flow?
Simply blood flow, but the electrical components come into play with rehabilitation. Now, once a brain cell's dead, it is dead. But if you think about the brain, you have billions of neurons being the cells in the brain. And if some are dead, the neighbors, though, can form connections around dead cells, electrical connections.
That's fascinating.
And so there is some ability to rehab from a stroke, even though those cells will not regenerate. And that's how, is the electrical component that you're mentioning, where neighboring cells will start talking to each other to basically accommodate for the loss of their neighbor.
Can you give us a percentage of how much rehabilitation is successful?
Truly, no. What I tell people is, I think a common misconception is once a stroke happens, it's done for. And that, sometimes is true. But
you hear that, okay, this part of the brain is dead because of the stroke. But this other part of the brain is now learning those activities or role, or that role. Is that true?
Absolutely. So what I tell folks is every single person who has a stroke will have rehabilitation. Because I think a lot of people come into clinic either weeks, days after a stroke and are disheartened and debilitated. And so I mention that because it's true. Over the order of 9 months to a year, we're talking a pretty big time frame, you'll accommodate. That brain that's still alive will learn to basically take up the slack. And so I hope to, when I say that, and give people hope and give them the reality. The only caveat is I can't ever say how much recovery, where the rehabilitation will stop. That's kind of the unknown. But there will be rehabilitation.
Further evidence of the miraculous nature of the body.
Yep.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back with, I know everybody wants to talk about prevention, which is critical, but and then we're going to talk about emergency medical help, and I'm going to challenge you on some of that.
Yeah.
And we'll be back with more after these words.
The World Language Scholar Journey at Oak Mountain Academy is designed to provide students with a clearly defined, curriculum-based track to acquire essential knowledge and skills for success in biliteracy fields of study. The successful completion of this journey provides colleges with a method to recognize a rigorous foreign language immersion experience for all students at Oak Mountain Academy. I'm Patrick Duran, head of school, inviting you to journey with us on the mountain. For more information, visit us at oakmountain.us. Discover your journey at OMA. Prepare, explore, and achieve.
Consider the Mobius strip. Take a strip of paper, twist it, connect the ends. This connection forms a continuous loop. Seamless, infinite. That's how your healthcare should be too. At Tanner Health, the Mobius is our symbol and our promise, representing our continuum of care and our commitment that the services you need will be here for you always. We're not just changing healthcare, we're redefining it. See more at tanner.org.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gradick, your host, Dr. Michael Wilshire, one of the newest member of the Tanner, or probably one of the newest members of the Tanner's physician staff, and he's a neurologist, and we grew up primarily in Noonan, and we welcome him here today. I want to. I keep promising we're going to talk about prevention, and I really do mean that.
Sure.
But there's one thing that fascinates me, and I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to kind of challenge you on.
Sure.
Most strokes happen in the early morning hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Certainly, my experience is that it's called we have a term for it. It's so common. It's called a wake-up stroke.
Oh.
And so
That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, and what that means in kind of medical lingo, is that mother, father, family member, whoever it is, wakes up, they're not normal, or they have new symptoms. And so no one really knew when it happened. Could have been 9 p.m., could have been 4 a.m. And that's a real problem in stroke treatment.
Really?
Because you have to be real certain of when the symptoms started. And so that is a major, major challenge.
Wow. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But that moves into the next question. This is where I'm going to kind of give you a challenge. We hear that you have a certain amount of time to get to ER where you can be treated.
Yes, sir.
But then I read that the chance of that treatment being successful, if you get there in that very limited window of time, assuming that the stroke was immediately prior to time of transport,
right?
Even if you get there with all of that done, then the chances of that medication or whatever treatment it is not that great.
Yeah. So the medication is called TPA. TNK is these are acronyms for real long medical lingo. But those are medications that are called thrombolytics. And so that means that they burst up clots. And so if we think of stroke as like plumbing, if you have a clog in the drain, you put some Drano in and bust up a clot. And so that's what these medicines essentially do. And there's a very strict time limit on it.
How strict?
4 hours from symptom onset, meaning last no normal, to 4.5, depending on the situation, but that's the max. Anything beyond that is contraindicated, and actually the risk of the medicine, like you were talking about, is hemorrhage in the brain, which is fatal. And so it's not a medicine without risk. And so it's a really important decision to make on the spot. And so if it's beyond 4.5 hours, then it's not worth doing.
And I assume the sooner the better.
The sooner the better, yeah, that's true.
And what level of success does medication have?
It varies on how big the clot is. So if it's a small vessel, just in my experience, I would not expect complete resolution in the majority of people. But I have seen, just approximating maybe 25-30% of people with very small strokes who get it with complete recovery and walk out of the hospital. And so, certainly it's worth doing.
Sure.
And can save a lot of debility.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a big major vessel clogged, the thrombolytics probably will not completely resolve it.
Again, I keep saying we're going to talk to prevention, but I think this is important. Give us a little brief overview of the blood supply going into the brain and how the plumbing works.
Yeah. So, two major vessels. Actually, let me back up. The blood supply to the brain is separated into what we call the anterior circulation, meaning the front circulation, and then the posterior circulation, meaning the back circulation. And so that's the two major categories. The anterior circulation, or the common stroke location, comes from the carotid arteries. And so these are arteries in your neck you may have heard of.
Oh, sure.
And they come up and they meet, and they become the middle cerebral artery and the circle of Willis, which is the little loop where all the blood supply communicates to each other. And then the posterior circulation, not to get too nerdy here, is
go for it.
The vertebral arteries, which are back here.
Right.
Not so much in the front.
But I thought they went into the back of the skull.
They do. So the vertebrals come up and they meet and they become the major highway into the brainstem, called the basilar artery. And it's called basilar artery because it's kind of snake-like. And then the basilar artery will come up and then supply the back part of the brain and eventually meet where the carotids came.
But you cannot operate on the vertebrals, right? You can operate on the carotids. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
You cannot operate on the vertebrals. You can operate, but you can't operate on the carotids.
Well, it depends. If the basal artery, which comes from the vertebral,
Yeah.
if you have a stroke there, that's probably the most severe stroke because it supplies the brainstem.
Yeah.
The brainstem is the area of the brain where you breathe from and do basically all your subconscious things that you need to stay alive. And so if you were to have a big clot in what the vertebrals become, which is the basilar, that's someone who will be obtunded, and the mortality of that exceeds 90%.
Yeah.
And so that is a major stroke.
But
Yeah.
but surgery can be called for.
Yes.
Okay.
So in any stroke, whether it's carotids or the posterior circulation, we can give thrombolytics within 4.5 hours, which is an important part of treatment, critical part of treatment.
Yeah.
But then also a majority of, a certain percentage of folks will have what's called mechanical thrombectomy if the clot is large enough. If the stroke is large enough that the medicine's not likely to resolve it, what we'll do is still give the medicine, but then call the neurosurgeons to mechanically bring a wire usually through the thigh here, and they work their way up into the arteries of the brain, and they retrieve the clot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a risky procedure, and everything we're talking about is super risky, but everything we're talking about is also very dangerous, and so you just have to think about what's worth doing. And a lot of times it is worth getting a guide wire up there and pulling the clot out.
As we lead in to talk to the ever-coming prevention topic, let's mention, when somebody gets older,
Yes, sir.
Blood pressure becomes the big issue.
Yeah.
Everyone. And a large part of that, of course, is to prevent strokes. And in fact, I'm on amlodipine. I take 2.5 milligrams a day, but I take it at bed so that the overnight is hopefully a little more protected.
Yes, sir.
So tell us about hypertension, blood pressure as it relates to strokes.
Yeah. So the major factors, hypertension is a top one. If your blood pressure is high chronically, what that does is it thins or puts stress on the walls of the arteries over time if the pressure is high. And then eventually it can make them fragile. And people can have both ischemic strokes, which is a blockage, and they can have hemorrhagic strokes, which is bleeding. And so it's a risk factor for both, which makes it unique in that you really need to control that. Our goal is what we call normotension. It used to be 120 systolic blood pressure. I believe the guidelines have changed recently since my training to 130. But
which one's more important, systolic or diastolic? Systolic's on the top, right?
Yeah, they're both important, but in the neurology specifically, we focus more on the systolic because the brain regulates the pressure that comes into the skull. Based on the systolic.
Now, but also as you get older, the elasticity of is much less. How does that play into this?
As your elasticity becomes less, which is true, your arteries will harden over time. The diastolic will rise, and they do. That process does make arteries more fragile. If you think about hardening, they're less likely to expand or be elastic. They're more likely to just break. And so that's a critical part of this.
So the diastolic still is an important measurement.
It is. The systolic, though, the brain is focused more on the systolic post-stroke, and all the guidelines for stroke are based on systolic.
Okay. As promised, tell us about diet and exercise.
Sure.
Okay.
So the risk factor, I'll talk about, generally I think the public should know the risk factors for stroke. And so that the top ones would be diabetes. And the way that works is if you have high blood sugars chronically, those blood sugars, the sugar in the blood will actually attach to the arteries physically. It's called glycosylation, and will make the arteries frail. And so that's a major risk factor, and obviously controlling your blood sugars is critical if you were to have diabetes, in preventing stroke. We talked a little bit about hypertension. That's a major risk factor, and so.
And hypertension is simply an elevated long-term blood pressure.
Yes, or chronically.
Chronic.
Some people do have just a real high spike in blood pressure and have a stroke, like a 200 blood pressure that they normally would not have. But generally speaking, the bigger risk is chronically high blood pressure. And then, your diet matters. Your cholesterol levels certainly matter. That's a major part of this, because cholesterol basically builds up in your arteries and makes plaques over time, over the order of decades. And those plaques act as little platforms for clots to form on. And so it is a risk factor for making a clot and therefore having a stroke. And so that condition is called hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol. And controlling that with medications is essential before stroke, but also after, if the person was not on it before then. And so, knowing that having a diet low in cholesterol or saturated fats is critical. There's actually a Mediterranean diet that's good. That's a heart-focused diet, but also would be helpful in the same way in the brain. Regular exercise, at least 3 times a week, whether it's just brisk walking, not necessarily weight lifting, but activity 3 times a week certainly reduces the risk of stroke by reducing your blood pressure, by lowering your cholesterol levels.
Well, what role can stress play in this?
Stress can elevate your blood pressure. Stress in and of itself, like psychosocial stress, does have physical impact and can induce a stroke or put you at risk for a stroke. But it's the secondary effects.
It is.
Yeah.
Does the stress increase, or the chance of stress, if you will, increase as you get older?
I would imagine so. You have more.
Well, let me tell you, it does.
Yeah, I would imagine. That's what I find. I'm 36, so I'm not quite there yet, I don't think. But what I find in patients is, yes, you're going through different phases in life. You have more opportunity for things to go wrong.
We see a lot of advertisement now. In fact, I do this for these products like Super Beats, nitrous oxide. Is it legit or is it a scam?
Nitrous oxide, on paper, if you were to look up the mechanism, it's a vasodilator. But those would be. That
sounds good.
It sounds good, but there's no trials. No literature that I'm aware of that would support that.
But there's so much out there that does not have trials.
That's
it does
true.
not, so I mean, everybody's still kind of guessing.
That's true.
One thing I want to mention before we go, we talked about my father, but he had AFib also.
Yeah.
So with AFib, you have increased chance of strokes, and then you get on these blood thinners. I think he was on. It'll come to me in a minute. But it was a very potent drug. Eliquis. He was on Eliquis, and then I think something else. But tell us about how AFib, afibrillation. How does that impact stroke?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up because we hadn't talked about it. When we talk about ischemic stroke, that's the blockage type. Yes, diabetes, hypertension, all the things we talked about are risk factors, but there is a major other subcategory of atrial fibrillation. And so what that means is the heart essentially is not beating correctly. The rhythm of the heart is off. And so the heart needs to be synced where the first chamber contracts, the second chamber then contracts. And then atrial fibrillation is when you sort of have just random beats of your heart. What that does is allow stasis or sitting of blood in the chambers of the heart. And as blood sits, it's going to clot. It has to be constantly moving. It's all about movement of blood to
No
prevent
kidding.
clotting. And so what happens, unfortunately, is folks will have stasis because the heart is not moving blood correctly forward, and then a clot will form in the heart, and then it gets shot from the heart all the way up your neck and into your brain. And those can be real severe strokes because the clots tend to be bigger.
I think the medication was amlodipine.
That's a blood pressure medicine.
And that's pretty potent.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do the back scarring of the heart if you actually go in there to get the rhythm back. And that's
it turns out that if you have atrial fibrillation, the treatment to prevent stroke would be Eliquis or blood thinners, like you were mentioning. It's counterintuitive even to me when I was in training. If you control the rhythm of the heart, it actually doesn't affect the stroke outcome. It's more about the anticoagulation.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to have to take a break because we're going to run out of time. So we're going to be back with more with Dr. Wilshire after these words.
The Entrepreneur Scholar Journey at Oak Mountain Academy is designed to provide students with a clearly defined curriculum-based track to acquire essential knowledge and skills for success in business and leadership. Critical areas include identifying entrepreneurial characteristics, selecting a value position, and business model development. I'm Patrick Uran, head of school, inviting you to journey with us on the mountain. For more information, visit us at oakmountain.us. Discover your journey at OMA. Prepare, explore, and achieve.
Consider the Mobius strip. Take a strip of paper, twist it, connect the ends. This connection forms a continuous loop. Seamless, infinite. That's how your healthcare should be too. At Tanner Health, the Mobius is our symbol and our promise, representing our continuum of care and our commitment that the services you need will be here for you always. We're not just changing healthcare, we're redefining it. See more at tanner.org.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gradick, your host, and we've got Dr. Michael Wilshire, neurologist, who's a newly acquired member of the Tanner Physician Group. Tanner also has, if you want to learn more about stroke signs and symptoms, then you go to tanner.org/stroke. Tanner.org/stroke. We're going to have to wrap it up, Dr. Wilshire, but
Okay.
One thing you had mentioned that I'm really not that aware of, which is the possibility of strokes in people other than the elderly.
Absolutely. So I think a major misconception, and unfortunately one or two patients who I still remember, because it's so unfortunate. Misconception is that stroke is an old person disease, and that is true mostly. As you get older, you acquire more risk factors. But children and adolescents do have strokes, and when they happen, they tend to be more severe because they don't have those risk factors. So they tend to have either genetic conditions or, some sort of underlying, cause to make it come on so early.
Is it rare for?
It's rare, but it does happen. Like I've personally sent and given TPA, the medicine we're talking about, to a 13-year-old and sent him directly to surgery.
Wow.
And we had a good outcome, but he would have likely been in a wheelchair and not been able to speak for the rest of his life. So I think in the pediatric community, and especially mothers, fathers, don't really consider stroke as an option. And so I think it's important to get it out there and make people aware of it.
What if there's one or two things you would have people to know about strokes and stroke prevention? What would they be?
I think that I don't think I know that treatment of stroke, the most critical factor is time. For every minute that you're having a stroke, you lose 2 million brain cells. And so
How many brain cells are there in total?
Oh, billions if not trillions.
Trillions?
Billions if not trillions. I'm not sure, but it's a very time critical thing, and minutes matter. So when someone comes into the hospital, there's actually guidelines, we shoot for a door to needle, meaning door to thrombolytic time of 60 minutes. Oftentimes it's more like 30 minutes. And so when someone comes in the hospital, we have to get a CT scan. We have to recognize that there is a stroke. We have to get their history to see if they, we have to do all of this stuff and coordinate all this stuff.
Find out what meds they're on.
Yeah, and even getting the meds mixed up, and getting an IV, etc. Doing all of that in 30 minutes is a challenge, but doable. And so for the community, I think that recognizing the signs of stroke with the FAST acronym that we talked about.
Yeah, review that. Face, arm, speech, time.
Yeah, it's not all the symptoms of stroke, but it hits the most common ones. So if your face is weak on one side of your face especially, if one of your arms is weak or drifting, if your speech is off or slurred or slow, those are all signs of stroke. And time is the T, and that means time is critical. And I think that the community should have a game plan. I think you should call 911 if you suspect a stroke. And the reason is they can triage where the patient will go and go to the correct stroke center that's appropriate for the patient. So the bottom line, I think, is to be confident and act fast.
In transport, do the emergency crews, are they able to affect any kind of real treatment?
They are, in both triaging and oftentimes when people are having strokes, their blood pressure will be exceeding 200, just as a result of the stroke. And so, and they'll have atrial fibrillation oftentimes going on. And so definitely having paramedics is preferable over driving in terms of safety.
That's an important point.
I think so, yeah.
Because in my life, we've done it both ways.
Yep.
And I love driving fast. I mean, but, that's not the wisest move.
Yeah, it's hard, you want to get someone to the hospital, and trust me, I understand the driving, but I think that really objectively calling 911 is the safest and best route to go with.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in. This fascinating topic and a very important one, obviously.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And so anyway, welcome again to the Tanner Health family. And if you want to learn more, it's tanner.org/stroke. On the signs and symptoms of a stroke. And now you're a neurologist, so if there's ever any questions, primary care physician, internal medicine can refer them to you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Michael Wilshire. He's here now, and he's a neurologist, and we welcome him, and we thank him for coming in.
Thank you so much.
And we thank our sponsors, Oak Mountain Academy and Tanner Health. And go out and make it a great day. You're in tune to WLBB Carrollton.